Deepti Laurent is with me on the set to take us through the main stories in the papers today. Deepti, obviously New Zealand dominating the dailies.
That's right. This as the country prepares to bury its first victims from Friday's double mosque attacks. Thousands of people have been gathering around the country, like you see here on the front page of the Dominion Post. Thousands gathering in the capital, Wellington, yesterday, Sunday, to pay their respects because New Zealand is a country united in grief. While the New Zealand Herald says they are us and we mourn our 50 brothers and sisters together. The paper really going for a plea of unity and solidarity on its front page. While we've been looking at Al Quds, which is a pan-Arab paper, they're going with a cartoon depicting really what sums it up about the gunman, filled with nothing but hatred, Islamophobia, terrorism and violence that's etched on that gun. That's how the cartoonist sees the gunman.
Now, many of the papers are actually looking at the rise of far-right terrorism now.
Well, that's right, because in particular, I mean, this was a sort of cross-Tasman attack, if you like, because the gunman came from Australia. And we've been looking at the Australian press, the editors of The Australian, looking at the hard lessons that'll be learned from what they call the slaughter of the innocent. First of all, gun reform. We know that Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern is going to have to spearhead some really tough gun law reforms within the next 10 days. That's not going to be easy, but the Australian warns that it's necessary. The other major lesson to be gleaned from these attacks is that this man was not on any security watch list. I quote, "The growing power and the reach of extremist right-wing and racist ideology and its potential for violence is something that needs to be taken very seriously now by not just New Zealand and Australia, but the whole world over." In the Australian Financial Review, there's a writer who's been making the comparison between far-right terrorism and Islamic terrorism that we've known in the past. Interestingly, both are very similar. They both, I quote, breed in the undercurrent of ideas of civilizational humiliation and anger about Western foreign policy. Both have elements of rage about them as well.
There's also been a lot of focus on the role social media played in this attack.
Well, it's something that the Daily Telegraph, the Australian paper, is looking at on its front page. Antisocial, it writes there, evoking that the blame is being laid on social media for allowing the gunman's video to be viewed and shared millions of times. Tech companies have been trying to distance themselves from his actions, but this awful attack exposes how shockingly under-policed social media is. Whose fault that is, it still remains to be seen. Is it the responsibility of governments, of companies, of the individuals, of the tech companies? But governments and tech companies are facing an issue because right after the violence of the Islamic State group, they did crack down on social media. So they're now facing pressure to do so with the same kind of attacks perpetrated by the far right.
Deepti, let's come back to France now, where a lot of focus was, of course, on this weekend's violence in Paris on the fringes of the Yellow Vest movement. Disbelief, exasperation, anger, they're really the emotions we're getting through the front pages of the French papers. Let's show you a few of them. Here you have Le Parisien, or as it's known in France, Aujourd'hui en France, asking, how do we stop this? It's a question that we've been asking for 18 consecutive weeks now, and nobody seems to have the answer. Le Figaro going with a one-word headline, unacceptable, insupportable. It says France is not living in a country, is not a country living in a dictatorship. Saturday's violence only makes us feel like, quote, indignation, revolt, and shame. Finally, you have a Libération going with a very clever play on words, retour à la case départ. It's actually a play on words of retour à la case départ, which means back to the beginning, except in this case, it's evoking the riots, the vandalism. Deepti, something completely different now. A young refugee has been crowned chess champion in New York for his age. Yeah, I like this story because I think in this kind of atmosphere of tolerance, it's a positive story. His name is Tani Toluwa Aduwomi. He's an 8-year-old boy from Nigeria living in a homeless shelter. His family actually fled Nigeria to escape the persecution of Boko Haram. His local chess club agreed to waive the fees because his parents couldn't afford it. And a good thing now because he's actually New York's chess champion in his age group. He attends a free 3-hour practice session in Harlem every Saturday, and he plays online at the shelter at night to practice. His goal is to become the youngest ever grandmaster. I think he's well on the way to that. Look at that smile. That's so great. All right, we'll end up now with a young couple that was looking to buy a small apartment and actually ended up buying a mansion in Scotland.
Yeah, it's not as glamorous as it sounds, though, and it actually does have quite a happy ending. So this is a young British-Canadian couple who are looking to drop £30,000 on a Glasgow apartment. The man, his name is Cal, he attended the auction alone because his partner was abroad, so that should be the first red flag. Don't let your partner attend an auction unattended. She came back to find out that due to there was basically the mansion was being sold in different lots, and he'd gotten confused with which lot he was meant to be bidding in. He actually accidentally bid on the mansion lot instead of the apartment, and actually ended up purchasing the mansion that was had a leaking roof, missing floorboards, and no windows. Turning their misfortune into good fortune, though, the couple are now planning to transform the mansion into 3 apartments, flip 2 of them to pay off their mortgage. And what's funny is the actual mansion is not even in Glasgow. It's in a town called Dunoon that's so remote that they actually had to look it up after they bought the mansion to find out where they would be living.
That's certainly looking at something positively. I don't know if I would have gone quite that far. Thank you so much for that, Deepti, for that look at the press review. Of course, you can get a closer look at all of this on our website, that address, France24.com.